Chapter 18. The Gewandhaus. Felix straightened his framed watercolor paintings in his new roomy abode. He had already unpacked, so he touched up the place. The city overwhelmed him with joy, as it was where Bach once lived. Felix had accepted the position offered as the music director of the Gewandhaus in Leipzig. His duties were to start later in the week, allowing him time to settle. As he finished decorating, the doorbell rang. Felix answered to see his dear sister Fanny and brother-in-law Wilhelm. Fanny, Wilhelm. Felix threw his arms in the air from excitement. Fanny gave her brother hugs. Wilhelm gave a tight shake of the hand. The other held a sketchbook. Felix let them in, inviting them around the coffee table in the living space, next to a kindling fireplace. Some tea had been made at the hour, so Felix served a tray for them. Their conversation started with Leah's welfare. Felix had much worry, as Leah had not fully recovered upon his leave of Berlin. Abraham had assured that she would be fine and insisted Felix pursue the offered position in Leipzig. Fanny calmed his anxiety. Mother was walking in the gardens before we left. Her health is getting stronger. Oh, good. Felix gave a breath of relief. How are you, though? Your new home? Fanny gazed about. Felix smiled. I love it. It is a good abide. My official position at the Gewandhaus will begin later this week. Wilhelm opened the sketchbook in his hands. I've been making a lot of drawings lately. I wanted to show them to you. I see you have been working at watercolor. Yeah, I took regular lessons in Dusseldorf. Felix studied Wilhelm's sketches. It consisted of portraits of friends and family. The sight of them made Felix a tinge homesick. After discussing various subjects into the late evening, Wilhelm became tired and decided to retire to the guest room for the night. Fanny and Felix stayed up, spending time as siblings. Felix set out wine for deep talk. The conversation veered towards Fanny's inclinations. She told Felix, Brother, I've been meaning to get an opinion from you. It's about my music. As you know, I've been composing some serious works. All of your music is serious and well-written. Felix sounded confused at her statement. She continued, Even though our father does not approve, I am ready to try my hand at publishing. Whether he likes it or not, I am my own woman, and not under his roof. Are you truly sure that's a good idea? Felix sipped some wine. Fanny looked up to her brother in question. Are you not on my side of things? You have a family to take care of, your children, your house, your husband. Publishing will add to that list, as it is in the utmost serious obligation. Once you're an author you remain for the rest of your life. Do you understand? I think you were around father too long when you went to England together. Are you hearing yourself? You're turning out just as him. Fanny sneered in disappointment. Felix set his wine glass down. I am not like father. I have my own opinion. Wilhelm agrees with my idea. I have my husband's consent, so don't be angry if in a few years' time the music of Fanny Hensel is on every music stand in Europe. She sipped her wine. Felix stared at his sister, leaving a void in the room. The ticking clock felt like the beats of a heart. Fanny broke the silence. I'm going to bed for the night. We leave tomorrow. She left to join Wilhelm. Felix wanted to punch something, but instead headed to bed himself. The next morning at the breakfast hour, Fanny and Wilhelm sat at the table. Felix set a nice meal of hot cakes and sweet maple syrup. Butter was set out for Fanny and Wilhelm. Felix assured whilst topping each plate with a serving of bacon. The meat is well done. I've made sure to cook them to perfection. Once Felix joined with his plate, they ate in silence. Wilhelm glanced at the watercolor paintings hanging about. Fanny kept her eyes at her plate, still unhappy about the conversation the night before. Felix ate, trying to keep an uplifting expression. He opened his mouth between bites to speak, but the bell rang, so he set his napkin down to go answer. He opened the door to see Chopin standing alone in the corridor. Bitte, come in, Felix gestured to him. Some family and I are eating breakfast. I can set an extra plate if you want. Sure, Frederick entered. Felix led him to the dining table. Fanny was curious as the unfamiliar man sat quietly in the chair across from her. Felix introduced them. This is my friend, Frederick Chopin. He's a pianist and plays ever so beautifully. He has come unexpectedly. Nice to meet you. Fanny forced herself to sound polite. Chopin sensed the tension. Should I have come at a better time? 9, Felix assured. This is my sister, Fanny, and her husband, Wilhelm. Fanny plays wonderfully as well. I sure hope to hear you, Chopin was intrigued. Fanny nodded, finishing up her food. She then went to the piano in the other room to play her serious music as Frederick and Felix ate. Wilhelm sketched in his book. After all the plates were finished, Felix cleaned up and everyone joined Fanny at the keys. She played with all her heart, and it impressed Frederick to the full. When she finished, she turned to Chopin. "Now you must play. I am eager to hear you." Chopin traded spots with her and pressed some keys. He then began a waltz in shyness. Felix noticed he was quite nervous as Fanny watched. She nodded some, but didn't show enthusiasm. As the hour drew near, Fanny and Wilhelm got ready to leave. Frederick stayed at the piano, playing soft tunes as Felix escorted them to the door. Felix assured Fanny in a whisper, "Chopin does play very well. He's shy, I assure. I know you are unamused." "I'll take your word. Anyways, adieu, my Hamlet." She waved and exited with Wilhelm. As soon as they left, Chopin dashed into some grandiose etudes. His playing had suddenly become lively. Felix watched in awe. He wished Frederick would have had the courage earlier. Many locals knocked at the door upon hearing piano, as they knew Chopin to be in the city. Felix let some Leipzigers in, but didn't let his house get too crowded. After Chopin calmed down, he told Felix, "I am able to stay a day, if that's all right. Tomorrow I must leave, though." "Yeah, do stay. I could listen to your playing any time." "Have you anything new?" Chopin asked, scooting over on the piano bench. Felix sat and played some lines of his St. Paul oratorio in progress, singing as well. It was soon to be finished. Chopin smiled whilst listening. In turn, Frederick showed Felix a new concerto, which sounded divine. Felix was more especially enthralled at a notaro. He watched and listened closely. After Chopin played it, Felix recited a considerable amount by ear, as he wanted to play it for his younger brother Paul when he saw him again. The fun continued that day as the postman brought a carefully wrapped package for Felix. Chopin was curious as Felix unwrapped a large stack of 32 great folios, bound in thick green leather. On the back, with gold letters in nice English fashion, were the titles of Handel's music. Inside, upon opening it, had the following words: "To Director FMB, from the Committee of the Cologne Music Festival, 1835. These pieces were to be prepared for the Cologne Music Festival. There was much to be discovered with the volumes, as other publications weren't as complete. The rest of the day, Chopin and Felix looked through the folios, playing the music. Chopin sight-read sections of an oratorio while Felix sang to get a sense of it. He had a sufficient choral voice. By evening, they supped on sausage and vegetables. The next morning, Chopin packed to make his leave. He assured Felix, "I promise to return next winter. I am happy to have such a friend as you. I promise to have a new symphony by then, and to have it performed in honor of your coming back." Felix smiled. Chopin jumped a bit in flatter, then grabbed his luggage, making his leave. After Chopin's going, Felix was by no means alone. Ignaz arrived in Leipzig a day later to meet his mother, who was traveling from Prague. Felix feverishly wrote, begging him to visit. Ignaz settled at a nearby hotel, then accepted the invitation to Felix's abide. When Ignaz walked in, Felix found him all the same as usual, only slightly older. It was most likely the effect of fatherhood, which matured any man. Ignaz always thought Felix to be growing. Straight away, Ignaz went to the piano to look through Felix's second book of Lieder ohne Worte that he had recently completed. They were delightful and charming masterpieces. After sharing music, Ignaz asked Felix, "Would you want to accompany me tomorrow to meet my maminka? She is bringing homemade cake. It is divine." "I'd love to, but I start my duties at the Gewandhaus. I'm already receiving commissions of concerts to prepare. Yet this weekend I've been invited to be introduced to a young pianist that would like a concerto performed. It is a young girl by the name of Clara Wick. Her father wants me to hear her. Would you like to join?" "I'd love to. I could bring the spare slices of cake from my maminka." "Excellent," Felix chimed. Felix awoke early the next day to prepare for his first day at the Gewandhaus. He wore an outfit of refinement and professionalism. The thought of working with a new orchestra excited him, but also made him nervous. It was questionable if it would fare better or worse than Dusseldorf. When the carriage parked at the street side of the place, Felix observed it from the outside. It was an old structure that appeared on the dull side. The building had obviously been transformed into a concert hall. He disembarked the carriage to observe it closer. The doorway contained a plaque of the orchestra's motto engraved in Latin, Res severa est verum gaudium. Felix nodded at it, then continued in. Standing in the lobby was Herr Schleinitz, a fellow director who helped hire him. He greeted Felix. "Welcome, Herr Mendelssohn. I thought I'd show you around before meeting the musicians. They should come within the hour." "Oh, good." Felix turned about the well-maintained interior. It was a world of difference compared to the outer structure. Schleinitz led him to the auditorium, in which caught Felix's interest. It was tall and elegant, with chandeliers. The ceiling was adorned in decorative art. Felix asked Schleinitz, "How is it those chandeliers stay lit? I don't see any candles in them." "We have gas lighting. Here, I'll show you." Schleinitz went to a wall where a small knob stood. He gestured Felix to turn it. Felix did, and the lights turned off in capital speed. He turned it again, and everything came back on in the same fashion. He began turning it back and forth, in confusion, until Schleinitz grabbed his arm. "Yeah, it is real. No candles." "This is crazy." Felix stared at the lights. Schleinitz turned Felix's attention by guiding him towards the stage, at the head of the room. The seating in the hall was different, as the benches didn't face the stage. There were 2 groups of chairs at each side of the auditorium, turned towards each other. Schleinitz then explained, "There is to be a concert in only a day hence. You won't get to rehearse much with the orchestra beforehand. It is something they had been preparing with the previous director. Nothing should be too troublesome. As long as they've been practicing, it should be fine." Felix turned as some musicians entered. When the orchestra assembled, they seemed quite pleased to have Felix at the conductor's desk. Yet the concertmaster's seat remained empty. Felix asked Schleinitz, "Who is concertmaster?" "We don't have one at the moment. The old one moved away," Schleinitz explained. Felix nodded, then spoke his thoughts. "I know a man for the job. I'll make arrangements later." He then turned to the scores on the music stand. One caught his eye, so he announced, "Let us start with the Beethoven Symphony." As the musicians opened their music, Felix grabbed his English baton to conduct. Straightway a violinist grumbled, "Oh, one of those conductors." "What is wrong with a baton?" Felix questioned. Schleinitz went to Felix. "I am sorry to inform, but they've not had a director that used a baton before. They aren't used to such." "Well, I assure it is now a standard. It is not terribly modern. Spontini uses a large baton, and Weber used to roll up a piece of paper. I try to make it look refined." Felix raised his baton, which had the thickness and style of a magician's wand. When counting the musicians into their music, they obeyed accordingly. The splendid tone was like a breath of fresh air compared to the Dusseldorf orchestra. There were still things to be improved, but a course of 6 months would make this orchestra shine like no other. Felix felt happy at this new beginning. It would be regular, official business. The next evening, Felix conducted the concert. It was a bit nerve-wracking, as the time only allowed for 1 rehearsal. The concert hall, with the audience, had a profound silence when the music rested. The musicians played adagio in the most masterfully manner, that even the most delicate notes could be heard. The allegro sections weren't as together, dragging as they were accustomed to slower tempos. Felix tended to use a faster speed. He liked to express his inner energy. In 4/4 time, they went capitally. The violins attacked with a degree of vehemence that startled Felix at times, but delighted the public. A few other works weren't up to standard. 1 rehearsal beforehand wasn't sufficient enough, but the Beethoven B-flat symphony went splendid. The Leipzigers clapped and shouted after each movement. Each person listened like popping jays, as Zelter would have described it. After the concert, the orchestra received many congratulations. The weekend soon came after the initial first days at the Gewandhaus. The work had fared satisfying. Felix rejoined with Ignaz, and together they headed to the Wicks household to meet Clara and her father. Their home was settled in a well-to-do neighborhood. Herr Wick made a decent living teaching piano, as well as obtaining the income from Clara's concerts. Clara was in high regard as a young pianist. Felix had interest in meeting the girl, but the fact that her father encouraged her performing and publishing was so very different from his upbringing. It made him question Abraham's ideals. When knocking at the door, there was the faint sound of a decent melody playing from a piano. Felix knocked again, and they waited more. Ignaz held a wrapped package of the cake slices his mother baked. A maid answered the knocks. She whispered as she let the 2 guests in. "Herr Wick is teaching a student. He shall be with you shortly." Ignaz and Felix sat on a decorative bench in the entryway. The piano in the other room continued softly, playing a sweet melody, rather good for a student. Felix shut his eyes, relaxing in the tones. Suddenly a loud voice barreled over the music. "Falsch! The piano's soft notes jumped to a jumbled chord as the player had been startled. It caused both Felix and Ignaz to lift their heads towards the room. The stern voice exclaimed, "Measure 15 is supposed to be softer. How many times do I have to tell you?" "Es tut mir leid," a man's voice apologized hoarsely. "I fear my hand will never regain its strength." "Keep working on stretching it. You need to gain flexibility. Here." "Ouch," the student's voice echoed through the house. Felix became curious about the commotion, so he headed towards the door. Ignaz stopped him. "I don't think we should go in yet." "I want to see what's happening." Felix grabbed the doorknob. He creaked the door open to get a peek. Inside was a music room, with a clavier stationed in the middle. Standing at the side of the piano was a young girl, observing the scene. Felix assumed it to be Clara. At the keys was a man, close to Felix's age. He had dark blonde locks. Instead of playing, he clutched his hand as if it were in pain. Standing beside him, in a stance of frustration, was a middle-aged man. It was Clara's father, Friedrich Wick. He calmed his voice and sighed to the man at the piano. "Robert, you may have to keep your concentration towards other things, such as your journalism and critiquing. I believe we are beating a dead horse in strengthening that hand." "I don't understand why it's not healing enough." Robert stood in utter somberness. Clara went to him. "You still have skill and yield beautiful melodies. Bitte, take my word for it. Don't give up piano." "I'll take your word." Robert smiled at the 16-year-old. She gazed back, blushing at the 25-year-old, who was dashing in her eyes. Friedrich crossed his arms, noticing such looks. He intervened by telling Robert, "I've got guests coming. Herr Mendelssohn is to be here." "Really?" Robert brightened. Herr Wick came towards the door. Right away he noticed Felix standing and snooping in. Friedrich felt some embarrassment in not noticing him before. He called Felix. "Come in." Felix entered with Ignaz close behind. Herr Wick gave an expression of surprise. Felix quickly explained, "I hope you don't mind that Mr. Mochel has decided to join me in coming." "Oh, not at all. It is all the better," Herr Wick exclaimed. Robert stood in complete awe at the sight of Ignaz. He could hardly speak when Mochelis asked his name. Robert finally formed his words. "Schumann, Robert Schumann." "Mr. Mochelis, you must know, I attended a concert of yours, and it is what helped spark my love of music. Your compositions are superb." "Thank you. I heard you playing well earlier." "Danke." Robert felt flattered. Felix asked, "Do you compose? I think I have seen your name in regards to journal reviews." "Yeah, I compose when I can. I am very busy with the literature aspects of music, such as reviews and essays. I have much intent to pursue piano, but I've been afflicted with a hand injury." Schumann sighed. "You still play suitably from what I heard. I don't want to leave without hearing you again, and some of your works," Felix stated. Robert then questioned Felix, "Do you write? Literary speaking?" "I write letters frequently, and suitable things as so. I wouldn't keep a diary or anything of that sort if that's what you mean." "I see," Schumann nodded. Ignaz set the wrapped slices of cake at a nearby table. Clara pranced towards him to get a slice. Ignaz unwrapped one, revealing a fine chocolate cake with a snowflake pattern in confectioner's sugar on top. He let Clara take it. "My maminka from Prague made it. It's her famous recipe." Clara tried a bite. "It's fantastic." She then devoured the entire piece. Felix was distracted in talking with Robert, so Ignaz handed him a piece. He ate subconsciously, but paused his speech as he noticed how tasty it was. Turning to Ignaz, he instructed, "Bitte, tell your mutter this was the best cake I've ever had." "I will." Ignaz felt proud that his mother was such a good baker. Herr Wick then encouraged Clara, "Show Felix your concerto." "Yeah, father." Clara obeyed, seating herself at the keys. Felix stood beside, leaning against the instrument to listen close. Friedrich grabbed the score and set it before Clara. Straight away, she started playing. Felix pricked his ears at such impressive strides. As the music went on, Herr Wick went to Felix in a whisper. "I want you to host a concert at the Gewandhaus for her. She shall play as soloist. You conduct." "I can work something out. This piece seems sufficient for the orchestra." Felix nodded. Herr Wick smiled. Ignaz listened, but his attention veered between Clara and Robert. They seemed to meet in eye contact through most of the concerto. The deeper their glances, the deeper Clara drove emotion into the instrument. yet her concentration was forced fully to her music for the last movement. After the finish, Clara gracefully lifted her hands from the keys in all etiquette. Everyone clapped, and Felix commended. "You are full of the utmost grace. That was beautiful." "Danke," Clara bowed her head in a polite manner. "I'd like to play something else for you, something I thoroughly enjoy." She went to the music shelf and pulled out a piano book. It was the first volume of Felix's Lieder ohne Worte. As soon as she started playing her favorite selections, Felix felt his ears in a soothed state. Clara played his work so fluidly. She enjoyed the compositions immensely. When she was tired and in need of a break, she begged Schumann, "Robert, bitte, you play. Felix wants to hear you again. Be sure to play Felix's work, The Calm Sea and Prosperous Voyage, as your interpretation is ever so lovely." Robert sat after she stood. He played as she wished, and did so in capital fashion. His playing had a high level of capacity when he didn't push the limitations of his hands. The pieces of his own were worth taking note of, yet after a few more pieces, his troubled hand got the best of him, ending his playing for the day. Both Felix and Ignaz were impressed by Clara and Robert. Felix had much intent to become well acquainted with Herr Schumann, and felt a strong will to help him in the prospects of composition. Upon their leave, the weather had become fickle with rain. Felix thankfully had brought along a frock coat. Ignaz, however, only had a light coat. He didn't say anything, and planned to get to his hotel in haste. Robert stopped him and confronted. "Mr. Moscheles, I have a cloak I can lend you. You shall not go out in the rain in improper attire." "Thank you." Ignaz felt a slight embarrassment of the favor. Robert handed him a warm cloak. With that, Felix headed home, and Ignaz his hotel. The next week, Felix returned to normal duties at the concert hall. On Monday morning, Felix joined a discussion with Herr Sleinitz and another musician, Herr Hauser, on the subject of the coming concert season. Many artists, new and old, wanted their work performed. Herr Sleinitz and Hauser suggested artists left and right. Felix found a lot of new music colorless, but listened to his fellow directors' opinions. "How about that second symphony by Ignacy Felix Dvorensky? He has received second prize for that composition in Vienna." Sleinitz gave his idea. Felix nodded. "I'd be willing to conduct that. I must say, the young girl Clara Wick has a new concerto. Her performing skills are superb. Mr. Moscheles is in the city as well. Those would make good concerts. Along with those, the orchestra could play various works of Beethoven, as those always seem to go over well," Hauser suggested. The three then thought in silence, not having any other ideas. Hauser broke the thinking with a tease. "I did receive a letter from Kalkbrenner. He'd love to have you conduct a concert for him." "How about 9? I'm not conducting for a little fish patty," Felix retorted. Hauser corrected. "He's more like an indigestible sausage. I'd not let him play a note here." Their conversation ended as the orchestra began gathering in the auditorium. Felix tended to his work. When they were set to play, the instruments looked ravishing and healthy, producing a pleasing sound. These musicians took care of their instruments by putting them in their cases. Felix could tell a world of difference in sound compared to the Dusseldorf orchestra. Each musician was ready when counting in, making the day prosperous. In the evening, everyone packed up to go home. Felix headed to the hotel in which Mr. Moscheles was staying. Each evening, Felix joined him for tea and music. Ignaz already had a tray of fragrant jasmine brewing. Felix sat in one of the two chairs angled towards each other beside the coffee table. He grabbed a teacup to take in the soothing comfort of hot herbs. "How is work?" Ignaz asked, pouring himself a cuppa. "All is well. I spoke to Herr Sleinitz and Hauser on the subject of concerts. They agreed to host one for you and Clara's concerto." "Excellent. I'd like you to play at my concert. There is a piece for 2 pianos. I also may want your ever-so-popular Hebrides overture to creep in as well." "That would be splendid," Felix agreed, then set his cup down in all seriousness. "I do sense that after these concerts, we may depart for some time. You'll be off to London, I imagine, and I am going to pay a visit to Berlin. We shall make the most of the soon-coming November with concerts together. I'm certain we won't be separated too long." Ignaz stood from his seat. Felix got up as well, but apologized. "I do say I am sorry, but I can't stay for piano tonight. Early tomorrow, my pupil, Bennett, is coming to my home for instruction. He is composing well. I must retire for the night." "That is good. Invite him to accompany you here sometime." I'd like to hear 'em, Ignaz encouraged. Felix smiled, then bid farewell. It was the morning of early November, with the sky a cloudy gray, when the horses eagerly clopped towards the site of civilization. My carriage arrived in Leipzig. I grasped the letter of introduction in my pocket to be sure it was safe. It contained the note of recommendation from Herr Mendelssohn. This is where I came to take my position as concertmaster of the Gewandhaus. With my violin case beside me, I felt relief to be in my home country of Germany. My previous place of stay was Moscow, Russia, where I had many musical engagements. Yet when I received notice from Felix of the open position in Leipzig, I felt a strong need to leave the cold country. The trip was excruciatingly long. I felt discouragement as the carriage pulled up a quiet street to park beside an old cloth hall. Surely, I asked the coachman, this is not really the concert hall. It is the Gewandhaus, the coachman pressed the obvious. I gathered my things and stepped out, not wanting to argue. He was in a mood from long travel, yet as was I. My spirits lifted as I noticed a man walking up the street, carrying a flute case. I went ahead and entered the front doors. When I came to the lobby of the highly renovated interior, which gave me much surprise, a man greeted me. "Hello, you must be the new concertmaster, are you not?" "Yeah," I handed my letter of introduction. "My name is Fernand, or Herr David. I've come upon the request of Herr Mendelssohn." "I am Herr Hauser. Now let me look at these papers quick." Hauser skimmed them over, recognizing Felix's handwriting. After deeming the papers legit, Hauser encouraged, "Come, I shall show you around." While exploring my new place of work, I felt a sense of much-needed happiness. The other musicians were nice and greeted me with enthusiasm. They seemed ever so grateful to receive a concertmaster. Yet when everyone took their seats, there was something missing, something quite important. I turned to Hauser. "Where is Felix?" Hauser gave a sigh. Sorry if he did not give word. He took a short leave of absence to visit his parents in Berlin. He should be back by next week. In the meantime, I believe you will be making sure things are well around here. Your real duties will be determined when Felix returns. I imagine you have much experience, so I'll leave you to it." "All right," I gave way to slight confusion as Hauser ventured off. I stood at the music desk, with my violin case at hand. The musicians of the orchestra stared at me, waiting for my instruction. This wasn't what I had expected on my first coming. With forced confidence, I unpacked my violin and tuned it. I then flipped through the first score I saw at the conducting desk and instructed everyone to begin with said piece. In thankfulness, everyone cooperated, even though they hardly knew me. In the warm, homely estate on Leipziger Strasse No. 3 in Berlin, Felix felt much comfort being with his family. He sat on the sofa in the parlor, sipping tea near the fireplace. Leah sat at a drawing table, silently working at her knitting. Fanny's child, Sebastian, and Rebecca's child, Walter, were on the floor nearby, playing with toys. Felix looked towards Abraham, who was sitting in his usual chair close to the fire, reading a book. It was a most calming hour. The children bantered a bit over their toys. Sebastian took a wooden horse from Walter. "I want that." In turn, little Walter cried. Felix set his teacup down and went to the children. He informed Sebastian, "Your cousin had that first. Now give it back to him. Share." Sebastian listened to his uncle, but in hesitation. There were other wooden animals to play with, so Felix spent time with his nephews, joining in their little game, using imagination. Leah couldn't help but smile at the sight of the three. Felix got into it quite intently. Abraham rolled his eyes, but the children loved it. Fanny then walked into the room. "Brother, playing with children's toys?" she teased. Sebastian and Walter giggled. Felix stood up. "Just keeping my nephews in good company." "I'm kidding, that looked quite adorable. You'd be an excellent father," Fanny hinted. "If only he'd find a wife, all would be well," Abraham commented, not veering his eyes from reading. Felix shrugged, and the room went in silence. Abraham suddenly felt a strain in his eyes. He set his book aside, thinking he had read too long. Leah asked as he rubbed his head, "Are you all right, honey?" "I'm fine, only a headache," he stated, closing his eyes for a bit. Leah continued tending to her yarn. Her senses for the health of her husband were in worry. Felix, meanwhile, headed out of the parlor, towards the stairs to his room. When taking the first step, a ring at the door turned him around. The servant went to answer, but Felix had a strange inclination to get it. He raced ahead of the servant. When opening the door, he expressed excitement. Ignaz. Felix threw his hands in the air. You must have followed me home. I was passing through before returning to London. It was on the way, and I figured you'd be obliged to let me take a rest here. Plus, my passport is on hold, so I can't do much right now, Ignaz explained. Felix smiled. Oh, Bitcha, do come in. You may take my room. I do not mind at all. Thank you, Ignaz entered. Felix helped him carry his luggage. When passing by the parlor, Felix mentioned to his parents, Ignaz is staying here a while. His passport is on hold. Do not fret, I've offered my room. Okay, sweetie, Leah called back. Be sure it's clean, Abraham stated in the midst of his nap. Felix turned to Ignaz. Don't worry, my room is spotless. I have no worry knowing you, always organized in housekeeping. He followed Felix up the stairs. When entering, Felix straightway picked up a few manuscripts laying here and there. He assured concerning the bed. The servants put out clean bedding today, so all is well. I shall sleep in the room upstairs. My sister's old rooms are taken up by my nephews, as they like to stay often. After Ignaz settled and Felix took what he needed to stay upstairs, they went to the music room. Fanny joined, standing by the instrument as Felix and Ignaz played. They improvised and duetted on the works of Bach. In between pieces, Fanny asked Ignaz, How long are you staying? I plan to be here until tomorrow, unless the police don't get my passport by then. I hoped you'd stay until Sunday. You would have been pleasing to hear at the next salon. Fanny gave a breath of disappointment. Felix teased, Let us hope the police take their time. Charlotte might be upset if I'm gone any longer. I miss my children. Ignaz sighed, thinking about his lovely family. Fanny looked to Felix. As for you, you shall play next Sunday. I'd like to hear your final decision of the Italian Symphony at the Keys. I like the original interpretations you sent me. Let me get the score. It should still be with the other scores I gathered upon returning from London with Father a little over yesteryear ago. Felix rushed from the piano and up the stairs. In his room, he searched every cabinet and shelf, as the music wasn't where he thought it to be. It became quite distressing to have an entire symphony lost. When returning to the music room with no score, Fanny raised a thick eyebrow. Felix confessed in frustration, I can't find it. I hope you remember what you wrote, Fanny scorned. I was looking ever so forward to hearing it. I don't know where it could have gone. Felix sat at the piano bench with Ignaz. As the tension between brother and sister were sensed, Ignaz assured Felix, If you can't find it, I can obtain copies from the musicians that premiered it in London. Danke, Felix felt a pang of guilt, hoping not to put Ignaz through such trouble. To cheer up, he continued at the keys with a Bach fugue. There was no sign of a passport the following day. When the postman came with no such papers, Ignaz ran his fingers through his hair. Oh dear, Charlotte will be upset. My Emily will not forgive a longer absence. He paced about the main hall. Felix assured Ignaz, Do not worry, I shall write to Charlotte to calm your woes. I am positive she will understand. Thank you. You are a true friend. A letter from myself most likely would sound like an excuse. Ignaz felt relief. Felix went off to the writing desk. He grabbed a leaf of paper to pen a convincing letter. Dear Charlotte. Before finishing the address, Leah entered the room in a state of worry. Felix turned to her while dipping the pen in ink. Is something the matter? I am worried about your father. He decided to stay in bed this morning, as his eyes are still a bother. He seems so out of sorts. Should we call for a doctor? I say if he's still unwell tomorrow, call for one. It could be a bad headache, as he sometimes gets, Felix advised. Leah suggested, I shall be sure to make him herbal tea. Hopefully that will help. Be sure there is some calming chamomile in it. Felix continued penning the letter to Charlotte. Leah left to fetch the tea. Felix felt a sense of uneasiness. It was nothing like Abraham to sleep in, even in an ill state. After folding the letter with care, Felix handed it to the servant to send. He then headed to the music room, as the sound of the piano echoed. Ignaz was in his own world, pouring his worries into the keys. Felix stood quietly behind him. It was rare to see Mr. Moscheles with such emotion in his lonesome. Abraham unexpectedly came into the room and sat in a chair by the door. He seemed to be feeling his way about, as the sight beseeched him. Felix looked at his father closely. He had the look of a tired man, listening to the music while staring at nothingness. With another day passing, Ignaz was still stuck in Berlin. He was determined to stop worrying so much and savor the company at the Mendelssohn home. Felix took enjoyment in his extended stay, as every moment with Ignaz was one to be remembered. On that day, a doctor rang the bell. Leah had sent for one, as Abraham's eyes had not improved. He remained in bed all the morning and afternoon. Felix kept close to his parents' room, where the doctor tended to his father. Leah was beside Abraham, listening closely to what the doctor had to say. Felix didn't want to overcrowd the room, so he eavesdropped as the doctor explained. He has developed a partial blindness. Most likely it correlates with the horrid headaches. It is unclear if this is a temporary ailment. The fast development of it is quite strange. All in all, it could be a terrible migraine. Have you any treatments? Leah asked as they exited the room. The doctor stated, if he is still having trouble in a few days' time, I can try to get a medicine together. He then turned to Felix. The best medicine right now is to please his ears with music. I know you will be quite good at that. He patted Felix on the shoulder. After the doctor made his leave, Felix joined Ignaz once again in the music room. They kept the music soft and soothing as to not agitate Abraham. To their surprise, Abraham willed himself from his rest to the music room. He took the utmost pleasure in hearing the two maestros. The next morning, the 18th of November, Ignaz stood in the main hall with his bags to leave. He had received his passport in the early hours. Felix told him, since this is to be a long parting, I very much promise to come to London again. My father would be willing to come along, I'm sure. You are welcome to stay at Chester Place any day. Many thanks for letting me take your room in unexpected extendedness. I wish your family well. Ignaz picked up his bags and left to the carriage in haste. Felix returned back to the parlor, where to his relief found Abraham reading. His sight still seemed a bother, but he seemed in much calmness, reading the last chapter of the book to finish it. Back in Leipzig at the Gewandhaus, things were in a turmoil as I continued organizing the orchestra and rehearsals. There were concerts to come, in which I had not known I'd be preparing. Felix's leave became quite longer than Hauser had mentioned. Herr Sleinitz helped much as I worked in getting various symphonies and overtures prepared. There were notes of suggestions in the scores left by Felix. It helped, but certain things needed to be explained by Felix himself. My honest wish was to play my violin and perform my intended duties. As concertmaster, it was common to conduct a few things, but not everything. To my thanks, Sleinitz took to the music desk in rehearsals at times to let me play among the first violins, so the other musicians could get used to my personal gestures. A few more days bundled into another week of Felix's absence. Herr Sleinitz and Hauser were in a critical conversation concerning Herr Mendelssohn. I happened to walk in on it. Sleinitz assured Hauser, Felix is a trustworthy man. There is obviously something going on. He wouldn't just abandon his position. It's been over an extra week with no word. True, he has much vacation time, but without a word? I take that as carelessness. I say if one more week goes by, say bye to Felix as director. Hauser went away with a huff. Sleinitz fell into a fit of worry. He didn't want Felix to be fired from the job that suited him so well. I noticed that Sleinitz cared much about Felix, so I tried to convince. I am sure Felix will explain everything in the coming days. He is trustworthy. He will send a word. Sleinitz nodded, but my words didn't soothe his worry. He in utter desperation questioned, where on earth is the man? As the simple casket lowered into the grounds of the Berlin cemetery, the scene brought a surreal sense. Leah and her children watched in silence. Felix's mind was anything but silent. He didn't know whether he'd fall faint or vomit. His conscience kept him upright and his stomach settled by instructing, keep composure, be a man, take it. You must decide how to get on. Please your father. After the grave was covered, everything was said and done. Felix knew his old life had been severed. A new one was to begin. The carriage ride home gave way to his mind questioning the day. He became unsure what was real. Upon arriving home, Felix felt a sureness that his father would be home to greet him, or sitting in the parlor, book at hand. Yet upon entering the hollow estate, there was a cold reality. No Abraham greeted him in the main hall. When checking the parlor, his father was not reading his book there. Fanny knew Felix to be in an utter state of realization. She stopped him in the corridor as he continued checking the house. There's no point in trying to convince the day didn't happen. Without any words, he fell in a hug and wept into her shoulder. The fact of the matter hit him. He clung to Fanny tightly, ever so grateful to have his elder sister. She always watched over him, musically and mentally. He didn't know what he'd do without her. 3 weeks later, Felix's anguish really began to show. Like moving into a new house, life felt as if it had been there all along, until the obvious reminders were noticed. As Felix played piano in the music room, the melodies were especially pretty and gentle, yet it didn't feel the same as he was alone. His mother spent her time in the bedroom, upstairs to mourn. Paul tended to business at the bank, as Joseph needed all the help he could get. He also worked to take charge of the estate. Fanny and Rebecca were in their own homes, living their own lives. There was a loss of comfort knowing that Abraham wasn't in the parlor, enjoying the music or his book. The melody seemed to be hanging in the air, nowhere to find enjoyment, except to calm Felix's sadness. He recollected the past few days' events. Abraham had died on the 19th of November, in the morning 10:30. It happened so suddenly and in unexpectedness, but the manner was in his father's wishes, if it ever came to be. His brother Joseph came as soon as hearing the news. He informed Felix and his siblings that their grandfather had died in the same manner, at age 59. The physicians could not name his milady. After the fact, Felix still felt a determination to please his father. He wanted to be sure in the near future he was settled in a happy home, and finished with the St. Paul oratorio that Abraham had wished to hear. In the days to come, Leah took much comfort in her children and grandchildren. Felix stayed in Berlin for his mother, yet at the same time, the house was a torture of reminders. Each night, Felix retired to his bed, only to stir awake at each hour, thinking he could not survive his loss. He cried as his chest physically ached with each heartbeat, but forced any whimper to be silent as to not disturb Leah or Paul. Fanny visited the main house often for her mother, but mostly to comfort Felix. She knew he had clung to their father in recent years, after much quarreling before. It would be one of the hardest realities for him to face. At the writing desk in the music room, she found her brother sulking with his head resting on the desk, his oratorio manuscript underneath him, becoming soaked in tears. "Felix," Fanny tapped his shoulder. He sat up and stretched, then looked at his sister. He wiped his eyes, dewed in liquid sadness. The sight of Fanny made him feel better. She pulled up a chair. "Working on the oratorio?" "Trying to. I want it finished for the next Dusseldorf festival." "What have you got?" Felix noticed in her hands she held music of her own. "I finished a few songs. Wilhelm loved them and drew sketches to add ornament to them." Fanny handed him the music. Felix smiled at the pretty writing of Fanny and the intricate drawings penned by Wilhelm. "They are lovely." Felix handed back the manuscripts. Fanny smiled. "Wilhelm is very encouraging. He would like his art sent to the print shop. It would make the music more appealing." "You mean to publish your music?" Felix knew where the conversation was headed. He set his pen down, crossing his arms. Fanny showed a glance of horror as Felix's demeanor had the resemblance of Abraham. She uncrossed his arms by holding his hands. "Felix, I know you disagree, but Wilhelm supports my idea. For now, I have a few other pieces I can publish under your name. At least grant me that." "All right," Felix sighed. "Give them to me and I'll take them myself." "Danke, my brother. In future, though, I shall find my way in publishing. Father is not—" "Don't you dare speak of father right now," Felix blurted at Fanny. His tears reformed in his eyes. Fanny hugged him. "I am sorry. I shall not go further on this subject."